Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. The sponsor is Eco Engineers. Oh, Eco Engineers. What isn't Eco Engineers? I've had a really great vantage point of carbon dioxide removal. And so often I'll start talking with a company and they will say something like, oh, well, we've been working with Eco Engineers for a while now, either trying to build this methodology or just trying to figure this project out, trying to get the quantification right, trying to figure this MRV out. That has happened to me so many times. And I've been glad to see them have so much success with so many companies in our space. Eco Engineers is essentially a consultancy that helps carbon removal tech and project developers get to market effectively. If you've ever started a company, one of the early decisions that you're going to need to make is which of these things can we bring in-house and which of these things do we need to pay consultants for? And often the conventional knowledge here is that it always makes sense to bring stuff in-house if you can. But I think bringing in very experienced consultants early on can save projects a lot of time and money. For instance, you might end up on the phone with David LaGreca. David's going to be on the podcast soon. And David has done, dozens of methodologies within the voluntary carbon market. And if you could just get on the phone with David for a little bit and you are trying to bring a new methodology or protocol to market, you have some new approach, you're a biochar project and you're trying to figure out, given your technology, region, biomass availability, what is the best way for me to work within the options that I have available to me? That's a person that you could very easily be paired with. David will likely shave off time and money from what would otherwise be a process that is pretty overwhelming. And that's just the start of it too. Eco has been engaged with people I've known or worked with, from everything from project design to the actual MRV plans, doing the LCA itself, registering the project, doing the diligence support, feasibility studies, tech evaluations, market eligibility. I feel like they're halfway to being an EPC without actually being an EPC for some of these things. Sometimes you don't necessarily need one person full-time thinking only about your project. Sometimes it makes sense to get 10 people on a fractional basis who have worked on collectively hundreds or maybe thousands of projects. Whether or not that will be the way for your company to go, you'll have to take the calls to figure it out. And I very much think you should do that. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to get in touch with Eco Engineers. Tell them Ross Kenyon sent you. And also, 2 quick points of really fun news. Rudy Krebiel is going to be on the show sometime soon. We've been scoping a show for so long. He's one of those friends of mine that we're always trying to find the right container for a discussion between us. And because we speak so often, it always seems like you can delay and wait a little bit to do it. So Rudy's coming on soon. I'm really excited to have him on. The 2026 Eco Forums training series that Eco Engineers is putting on is coming out soon. It's a carbon markets training. It's on July 28th. You'll get to hear how experts approach real world, practical, how do we do carbon markets? How do credits work, where they think the market is heading, and how to turn those global carbon trends into a smarter strategy than what many people likely have now. If you're listening to this after July 28th, you can go to ecoengineers.us/ecoforums. Link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. Here's your show. Hello. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of Reversing Climate Change, the podcast you are listening to at this moment. I've worked in climate tech in carbon dioxide removal for about a decade. You might be wondering why there is a show with D.W. Pasulka that has popped up on your playlist for today. Thanks for listening. Before I explain the what and the how, the improbability of such a thing, if I could ask you to, while you have your phone open, you haven't started doing some other task yet, open up your podcast app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, something else, YouTube. Give this show a great rating and review. It really helps get this show out to more people and is much appreciated by me. It's one of the most important things you can do if you like this show is to give it a great rating and a review if you use an app that allows for reviews. I'm also doing a lot on Substack right now. So if you're over on Substack, you should follow Reversing Climate Change or me personally, Ross Kenyon. The link to do those things are in the show notes. And thanks so much for listening. I'm really excited about this show. I've been preparing for it for a long time. Pretty much as soon as I heard that Dr. Pasulka was having a new book come out, I, of course, go right for her email, being like, how can I make this happen? I've read her books several times. They're very good and very accessible books on what it means to treat the unidentified flying object, unidentified aerial phenomena, UFO, UAP, what have you, as a religion. And what does it mean to take some of these beliefs seriously? Her book, American Cosmic UFOs, Religion and Technology, is a fantastic introductory resource. It's not a dense academic tome, although if you read Diana's work, you can tell that she hangs at that level elsewhere. She certainly has the theoretical frameworks to make it happen. But American Cosmic was a book that opened me up a little bit to start thinking more seriously about where my belief in what is possible ends and why. And I'm not even sure that I've come to some finite conclusion about anything, so much as to say, I don't think the pure materialist story is all that there is, or if that's all that there is, there's likely a lot more to materialism than we really understand, and it might be far stranger than we think it is. But independently of the truth content of experiencers' stories, it's important to understand how these types of events impact society, and especially how they impact society given their technological overlap. Her next book, Encounters, Experiences with Non-Human Intelligences, starts talking about what's happening with AI before AI really just takes over. Like what it is now, it was not like this 2 years ago, you know? And starting to detail how people are thinking about what does it mean to have experiences with machine intelligence? And what does it mean for there to be non-human intelligences? And she gets into this in much greater detail in her new book, The Others, UFOs, AI, and the Hidden Forces Guiding Human Destiny, which, oh my goodness, literally on July 28th, this book will be released. And you can learn all about D.W. Pasulka's thinking around artificial intelligence, around Marshall McLuhan and media theory. We have some jokes in here about some of the people who predicted the future long ago, like McLuhan, but also we spent a fair amount at the show talking about David Cronenberg's film from 1983 called Videodrome, which is basically Marshall McLuhan's thinking on television and how it was changing the way our minds worked. It was networking our brains, and we were sort of fusing with media. And you watch it and it seems kind of hokey, like, yeah, whatever. And it's obviously more true now that people have smartphones. But with AI, I think it's going to look very different and not that much longer. And so we get to talk about how the tools we use become us, how we somaticize them, what that means. We go into Donna Haraway. There's just a lot of freaky theory, like cultural theory involved. And I think even if we're just talking about how AI is going to change society, I think even that alone is worth the price of admission here, and we'll likely have some things to teach. Our work in climate is going to be within a context that will need to relate with these ideas successfully. I'm not sure exactly where all this is going to come out, but I know that we need to start thinking about these ideas and their relation to how we live well together with regard to the climate and with regard to politics and ethics generally. I won't belabor it any further. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this show. I'm so excited to have Dr. D.W. Pasulka on reversing climate change. Here it is. Diana, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Are you weirded out that you ended up on a climate change podcast? Does this happen to you ever?
Well, I would say that the people who read my books are demographically varied. So, no, I'm not weirded out.
I think maybe the reason you're not weirded out is because you seem like someone who's so transdisciplinary that how could you not see links to basically all of human experience? That might be putting too much pressure on your work, but I think it holds. What do you think?
I think so, yeah.
How would you describe the continuity of your work? It crosses so many different areas as I just described. What's new about this book vis-a-vis your others?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. The continuity is that the one thing that I look at is belief, religious belief. How do people come to believe in certain things that we don't necessarily have hard evidence for? And technology. So, how these two things interact and inform each other. This has been something that I've been studying forever, it seems. So I've been studying this, and I study it in different contexts. So the first part of my career was looking at Catholic history and how media of the past, like popular culture and Catholic tradition, influences the ways in which people believe certain things. So here's an example. I wrote a book about purgatory, and purgatory is a Catholic dogma which suggests that people, when they die, their souls don't immediately go to heaven, usually because they're not, their souls may not be good enough to be in God's presence. So it has to be purified. And purgatory is this place where this happens. It's also referred to as a state, like a state of being. So this purgatory, contrary to the idea of what a dogma is, it's changed. The ideas of purgatory have changed within, the last 1,000 years. So what I did in that book was I looked at how popular culture and culture in general, but mostly popular culture, shifts the belief and even influences the Catholic hierarchy. So that was a case study, and it was a very kind of a very academic book. So that's what I did in the first part of my career. In about 2012, I started to look at the shift in infrastructure to digital technology, and I thought, well, the UFO phenomena is probably the best representative of this shift because it's decentralized. There's no pope, there's no hierarchy. And, people have their phones, they can record things in the sky, and they can post them on social media and so forth. And this influences what people believe. And a lot of belief in UFOs, if you go back to the 1940s, when Kenneth Arnold sees, the flying saucers over Mount Rainier, and then you have Roswell, right? So these are already interpreted, even in the 1940s, as spiritual events. So I thought it was going to be really easy for me to basically make the case that the UFO is, this thing we have no hard evidence for, but a lot of people believe in it, and it's due to this shift in infrastructure. Very much like the printing press helped the Protestant Reformation because everybody had their own Bible. So the technological infrastructure has a direct impact on what people believe and their religion. What I didn't bargain for when I started this was that the government was studying UFOs, and people from the government would reach out to me and be interested in my research because I had a lot of it from the historical record. And so this caused me to have my own shift in perspective about, maybe we do have hard evidence for UFOs. Oh my goodness. It took me about a year to get over that. So I had to shift everything in that book that was called American Cosmic. And that book it was a very academic book in my interpretation, but it became like a breakout bestseller. And surprise. So I've been studying UFOs ever since because of the impact that actually had on me. And then, there's been obviously we have the UFO disclosure going on with the release of all these files and so forth. So I was right before that happened. My book came out right as that disclosure began. And it's been quite interesting.
I was worried about this interview because there's just a million different angles and questions to have. Because I've read pretty much all of these things, some of them more than once. And I will be listening to your book all over once it's out in an audiobook as well, because there's so much to it. Well, one of the big splits that I've found in everything that relates to any of this phenomena is to what degree is it a material or supernatural set of phenomena. You have people like Luis Elizondo who think that this is sort of like a near-term security threat that has strong materiality to it. And then there are some people who, there's a story that you tell in, I forget which book it is, of a devout Catholic woman and her materialist husband, and they both see the same thing in the basement healing her dog, and he sees it as a machine and she sees that an angel. So there's also something clearly phenomenological and subjective happening in the experiencing of this too. I've noticed that the communities tend to be quite polarized in this way. What do you think explains that phenomenological understanding of what's happening?
Okay, so it's really, really interesting. So that the case, an example that you mentioned is Ray Hernandez and his wife Dulce. And they each had, so let me give the context. So this is the context. So Ray is an attorney, he's an atheist, and he's married to Dulce, and they live in Florida, and Dulce is Catholic. And they, they're going along, they have a dog, they love this dog, but it's an old dog. I think it's like very old, and it's kind of on its death, it's going to die. And so they're really upset about this. And Dulce, being Catholic, prays and asks God for some kind of milagro, right? A miracle And so then that night, what happens is that Ray wakes up in the middle of the night and Dulce is calling him. And he gets up and he goes downstairs and he sees this thing that to him looks like a greenish blue light hovering over his dog, and it has sparks coming out of it. And Dulce is on her knees and she's being, well, they're both really, I wouldn't call it terrified. They just are surprised. But Ray does something that's not characteristic of a situation like this. He looks at it, he kind of laughs about it, and then he walks back upstairs and he goes back to bed. And so she stays down there. The next day he gets up and his dog is completely better. He said it was as if she's lost 10 years and she's running around like a puppy again. And his wife is convinced that it was an angel, an answer to her prayers. But he's not so convinced. But it freaks him out to the point that he thinks it's like a UFO. And so he does a lot of research. He meets the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who also I've talked to before and does definitely, he's passed away, but he definitely believes in aliens. And so Edgar Mitchell becomes a mentor to Ray and tells him, well, there's a variety of these things. You have to kind of figure out what they want with you. So Ray has a mission. He becomes no longer atheist, but he's not necessarily Catholic or Christian like his wife is. All right, so I use this example to show that people can and do have the same event, but they see it differently. Now, you do have cases of this in religion, so the history of religion, in various religions. So you have examples in Buddhism, but you also have examples in Catholicism, a religion I'm very familiar with. And
Fatima, right, is another one of these.
Yeah, that's right. So the Miracle of the Sun in 1917, for viewers who don't know what that is, this is an apparition of the Virgin Mary. It happens in Fatima, Portugal, and the the people who witness it, by I think around 70 to 100,000 people are there. A lot of them see that they are at the same event, but they see different things. Some of them see the same thing, okay? People miles away notice something going on in the sky, so it's aerial phenomena and things like that. So it's not this UFO situation of having the same event but seeing different things by people who are at the event. This is something that's not unprecedented. We do see this in religion. So it was really surprising to me nonetheless when I noted that this was something that is often cited in when people have these experiences, including military people. So, I met a lot of people who would have these experiences, fighter pilots, people who were out at sea, like naval intelligence officers even, so the testimony, there's so much testimony that it's overwhelming, actually. So how do I account for this? First off, there are physicists, right, who are involved. A known physicist is Kevin Knuth. A scientist friend of mine is Gary Nolan at Stanford University. He's very well known now. He's in my book, American Cosmic, under a pseudonym. His name's James there. But, I think they're better equipped to kind of explain the physics of it than me because, I'm a historian of religion. So how do I explain this? I can only say that I believe these people, and also I can't explain how this happens. I can only explain that it happens, and I can give you kind of the details and the data of it. And that's partially why the military personnel were interested in my I had a log of events that I kept from doing my work in the purgatory research. I would come across these events and I'd say, I don't know what these are, but I'm going to write them down, right? Because they're so weird. But this is the stuff they wanted to see. And I have a friend now. His name is Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet.
I met Tim actually at an event that was not related to any of this. It was about ocean tech for a client of mine. He didn't talk about any of his UFO experiences, and I wanted to ask, but I would have thrown the whole event into turmoil. But yes, I know Tim.
Isn't that interesting? So I'm at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, which is very well known as being focuses on oceanography, and so in marine science. So they also know him. So a lot of my colleagues know him, and he's very much out there now about saving the oceans, but also about unidentified submersible objects. So these are objects that my own father actually saw in the 1950s when he was in the Coast Guard. And we just thought it was kind of a weird tale that my father would tell. And then when I met Tim Gallaudet, he showed me, data from people going back to the 1920s out at sea. People keep those logs. And so that's what his work is doing right now. He's looking at this data from there's so much of it. That's the thing. It's I think a lot of people have to understand that there's so much data out there that it's very overwhelming. And so various people, there are astronomers who are looking at old data, of things before we actually had things in the sky. We still had telescopes and so forth, and we did have data about things that we couldn't explain. People out at sea seeing things that we couldn't explain. And then the work that I do, which is looking at historical records like archival records and seeing that, people would see things and they would at first be very confused about what they were. And then they would say, well, maybe it's like the Virgin Mary's flying house. Or maybe, they would come up with an interpretation. Maybe this is a soul from purgatory. Right? So they just had different interpretive frameworks for understanding these things.
I think American Cosmic was one of the first books I read where I was trying to take this phenomena very seriously, because I'm Catholic as well, and that's a really weird story, right? God sends down his son to be crucified and die and resurrected from the dead, and it's a bizarre story, and it's no more or less bizarre than many other stories that are either old stories or parts of new religious movements, which I took a religious studies course in college, and they drilled into me that we don't call them cults, we call them new religious movements, and you take them seriously. And that was actually a pretty hard lesson for me to internalize. I had a friend who was a religious studies scholar. He was describing doing ethnographic work, I believe in the Caribbean, and was saying that these people practice magic. And I remember saying, no, they believe they're practicing magic, right? But part of doing good work is taking it at face value that these people are doing what they say they're doing and granting it some amount of credibility in this way so that they aren't just people that you're studying from a hierarchical positionality. And once I started doing this with either the UFO phenomena or UAP, or just hearing lots and lots of what I believe to be credible reports through shows like Otherworld, which I know you've appeared on, I started being overwhelmed by what if there is something that's happening here and it's actually quite sophisticated and interesting and no more or less strange than what I already believed. Now I don't know where to draw the line, though. I don't know if you ever find, how do you know if you're talking to someone who's sincere or there's crankiness in here? Should I just be open to literally all possibilities at the same time? Does it become a sort of like, I don't know, cabin in the woods, postmodernism, everything is true at the same time, inherent vice? We're going to get into media theory, don't worry. I'm going to reference a lot of films and Videodrome is coming. Is it not just everything is true at the same time? And how do I know what to make of all of these things that are being experienced by people? That's an enormous question. I'm so sorry to lay it on you, but what do I make of this?
This is such a good question. And, so in my field, you did a good job. You probably got an A in that class. So, that's what we do. So the first thing we have to do is train people to understand that in the field of religious studies, it's not theology. So we're looking at things from the perspective of like a scientific framework, right? And so we're looking at data, we're looking at people's behaviors, to ascertain, religion. Most people in the world are religious. So more than 80% of the world is religious in some way, are religious practitioners. So religion is something that is important to study. And the question that you raise, though, so first let me just explain. In religious studies, we call it bracketing. So what we do is we listen to a lot of people. You're right, a lot of stories about religion are weird, right? So, if we're coming from a rationalist, modernist Enlightenment framework, it looks weird. Jesus walking on water. Well, I've never seen anybody walk on water, right? And, he's born of a virgin. So how do we account for these kinds of ideas? Thomas Jefferson was a very he was a person who believed in ethics, and he called himself a Christian, though he was a deist, okay? But he also didn't like the miracle stories in the Bible, so he created his own Bible called the Jeffersonian Bible. And so he wanted to basically create an Enlightenment form of Christianity, a secular form, where he wanted to make Jesus into an ethical man, but not necessarily a divine being, okay? So in a sense, we've inherited that idea, a lot of people. And it's the basis for the university, for how we study. So in religious studies is no different from that. So when we go into a community that has different beliefs, they're different from my beliefs, I have to just understand them as a different framework for reality. They have this framework for reality. It's not my framework. But they don't have my framework, right? I'm not asking them to accept my framework. All right, so that's what we have to do in religious studies. But that doesn't mean that that's how reality is, okay? So reality could vary. I believe that reality is a certain way. I don't know exactly how it is, but I believe that it has certain attributes, right? And I believe I'm a realist. Like I believe in that. I don't think that I do believe that 2 + 2 is 4. I don't think that we can just make up a truth. Okay. So I'm not a relativist. All right. So when I'm going into communities of people who believe in UFOs, I want to see why they believe in UFOs. Sometimes they don't have any evidence at all. They just say, I had this experience. Well, a lot of people in religious traditions just say that. We had this experience. So there's that category, right? It becomes, this is what my problem was that I was used to working within that framework where they just have testimonial evidence. They don't have any actual hard evidence. Well, I moved into a arena, which was the study of UFOs, where that became something that we did have evidence for. And that's why it was a problem for me. So the problem that you're articulating here was my problem too, and is still my problem. So I had to write that book differently. I had to approach this differently. And I had to say, on the one hand, okay, it appears that there is evidence. There's radar reports, right, that show that when people see these things in the sky they can't account for, radar also picks up something that they can't account for. So there's this. There's also the fighter pilots or the people in the sky, right, who say, okay, we've encountered these things that we do not believe we have created. Like, we don't believe that it's, ours. It's not China's, it's not Russia's, it's not the United States. It's a super seemingly intelligent flying object. And that does present some issues, like Lou Elizondo says. People from, it seems forever, out in the ocean have recorded things that they couldn't understand in the sky, right? So anomalous objects in the sky. This is all data, right? This is all data that constitutes evidence. Then you have somebody like Gary, who's now looking at debris from some of these events. And he has he's a microbiologist, and he's an amazing one of the best in the world. So he's able to drill down into these objects with, at a level that is, able to identify the isotopes and stuff and the isotopic ratios. And he says that in the 1940s, and even today, if we were to create something like this, it would be incredibly expensive and almost unheard of. It would be unheard of in the 1940s. So, so he's looking at this. He goes, it's manufactured. We don't know by who or how it was manufactured. Could it be technology that's like super advanced, that is secret and stealth? It could be. Okay, it could be. So that said, I am not finished with that problem. That problem is still, it's still there. So that's kind of how I've been grappling with the whole thing. Yeah, it's a good question. No, I don't. To answer your question, I don't think we should take all of the, and say that these are, correspond to reality. Not all of them do. Some of them do.
Well, I can see why you're in Jacques Vallée's good graces. You don't have all the answers, nor pretend to. I think maybe that's where some of this stuff ends up in crankier territory, where people think they have a universal theory of what this is. And I feel like your research often points to more questions, especially as it pertains to media theory. I don't think anyone would have guessed you would have gone so hard into Marshall McLuhan as you do. Why would a religious studies scholar who's working on the UAP phenomenon end up in Marshall McLuhan and media theory?
Oh, yeah. So I've been a fan of Marshall McLuhan and his work for years and years and years. So, I think he was right. So he's predicting a time when human beings are going to shift because of their relationship with technology. Technology is going to...
this is a risk, though, right? Like, Woody Allen could come out at any point and drag him on camera to tell you nothing of his work, right? It's really risky to talk about him for that reason.
Because of Woody Allen?
Have you seen that scene in Annie Hall where he brings Marshall McLuhan out to scold the guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dangerous talking about Marshall McLuhan. Anyways, though, please continue your actual point. Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. Marshall McLuhan is, first off, I was interested in this time period. So, and I've had a persistent focus on media as technology, media technology. And from looking at my Purgatory book, I just kind of like brought it to the contemporary time period. So in the contemporary time period, I think that Marshall McLuhan has called correctly what's happening right now with the shift from kind of digital technology to AI superpowered digital technology. And, he said it was going to change the way in which we live and perceive reality, change our brains. He said a lot of things that were really interesting. And so, and he wasn't the only one, but he was the one who was most recent and I think most accurate. So why I chose to look at his theories again, and I've always taught him, by the way, when I do my, religion and popular culture class, I always teach Marshall McLuhan. He's interesting because what I found was it's not just him, but it's the Jesuit paleontologist of the early 20th century, Teilhard de Chardin. So he said very similar things to Marshall McLuhan. In fact, they predict a new form of human being. Okay. Now, how does this correspond with UFOs? So when you get into what people in the communities of experiences are people who have had UFO sightings and events in their lives, and they call themselves experiencers. Okay. Experiencers tend to say similar things. And one of the things they say is that I know this is where it gets into religion. So it sounds weird, right, to a lot of people. But they say human beings are undergoing this shift because of UFO, the people who are the aliens or the extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings, whatever they are actually cultivating human beings and helping them evolve, right? And so they believe that some of them believe that evolution is bad and it's a bad cultivation. And a good portion of them believe that it's good. Okay. So you do have this dichotomy. So Marshall McLuhan is not saying that it's the aliens' fault. He's basically saying we are definitely changing, and this is because of technology. And so he predicts how that's going to happen. And that's where in my book, The Others, I do a deep dive into Marshall McLuhan, look at Teilhard de Chardin, and Arthur C. Clarke, of all people. And those are these visionaries whose work I'm looking at. They all say relatively the same thing. And then there's a person who's living. His name is Mark Stallman, and he says similar things. And thankfully, I can ask him, right? I can say, "Is this what you mean, Mark?" and stuff. And so everyone else has passed away, but Mark is he's Catholic. He is a person who knows a lot about AI. He's used it and worked with it for many, many years, most of his life. He's the godson of Norbert Wiener, who a lot of people don't know, but if you read his books from the 1940s and 50s, you'll see that he was already warning us about AI. And he was saying, this is going to take over. We have to be careful of these intelligent machines. So that's so he worked with Mark's father, who was an MIT professor. And they worked and did the same kind of thing. And Mark inherited that. He knew Marshall McLuhan's grandson and son. And he knows about the work of Marshall McLuhan. And he's also the head of the Center for Digital Life.
When I think about Marshall McLuhan, I think at least this is a very layperson's read, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about the tools we use become somaticized. They become a part of our body, a part of our mind, and media is a tool that we use. And the phone and digital devices become extensions of our brain and in fact become like a networked brain in some kind of way. And I also link this to someone like Donna Haraway, someone that I know you've had a relationship with, and also someone whose work has puzzled me for a very long time. It's a hard read, and she's obviously very clever, but it's one of those things that you have to wrap your mind around quite a number of things to make sense of. I think it's easier now with AI, where we're able to see the impact of an external brain of brains, or just like a mind outside of our own, where if you watch something like, I imagine you've seen David Cronenberg's Videodrome. Have you seen that?
Yes, yeah.
How could you not have? But yeah, like Long Live the New Flesh, and you have like the merging with television, and it feels hokey in hindsight because you're like, TV wasn't really that important, but I'm sure if you were at that time and noticing how the advent of cable and how ubiquitous television was becoming, maybe that was different. But in hindsight, you're like, it's just like people watch TV, so what? But now with AI, you could actually see the going into the TV screen, like that moment in that film. That's actually happening now. Whereas I don't think that happened with television, although maybe because I was raised in an age where television was so ubiquitous, maybe I just don't see how my own brain and personality was impacted by the union of media technology at that exact moment in time. That's why I'm sort of blind to it. So is it actually a new thing with AI? Was television as important as it is portrayed in Videodrome in that kind of way? Or is AI just the same thing magnified or multiplied several thousand times?
Yeah, I think it's definitely magnified. But, okay, so David Cronenberg is interesting because I could be wrong, but I believe he was a student of Marshall McLuhan's. And of course,
That movie is like basically Marshall McLuhan in video form, is it not? It's feel like it's pretty close.
it is. Yeah. I just want to be careful, what I say. But yes. Marshall McLuhan is Dr. Oblivion in the movie, right? And so, okay. So the movie is about it's about the transition of the human being into, the evolution of human beings through this co-evolution with technology. So technology is basically the new flesh, like you put it. And you're correct. It somatizes, there's an enfleshment that happens with, our interaction with technology. This becomes very evident when we look at social media. So if you look at the ways in which, let's take the progression of social media. So first off, we have, Facebook, right? Which Mark Stallman calls television social media. So we've got, a television version of social media. You've got you can write stuff. In fact, there's no limit to what you can write. You can upload your photos, you can upload videos, right? And we're all looking at it and there's a feed, right? It makes kind of sense to us. Then we get to like Instagram and Twitter, kind of like second generation social media. No more can you write anything on Twitter. You can only write, what is it, like 17 characters or something like that, or 14 characters. And you just, you're stuck with, posting what you can post and so forth. They're very short. So it kills your attention span right there, right? So you're already interacting with it. You're interacting with it all the time because who doesn't have their phone with them all the time now? Okay. And then you've got Instagram where it's just videos. It's just, photos. It's, these kinds of things. So, and then you have TikTok, which again shifts everything. And even the social media images migrate into the internet culture, right? So you're going on your search engine and everything is a short, YouTube now integrates TikTok short videos on it and so forth. So you can't really get away from it. And does it impact the way we think? Absolutely. Does it impact us physiologically? 100%. So this is what the AI trials that we've recently been watching, with Meta and so forth. This is really important because it's the design of these platforms that's hurting us, especially young people and the development of their brains. It's not the content. And that's what Marshall McLuhan, that's what he's trying to say, is television, what did it do? It shifted people. They all, they no longer had community events down at the pub. And by the way, a pub is a public house. That's the name. That's what a pub is. We no longer have these public houses. Everybody is insulated in their living rooms watching TV together. And what's sad is that now that seems like a healthy thing to do. At least you're with each other, right? I mean, you're not on your phone, like your son is upstairs, you're downstairs, and, this kind of thing. So that's what's kind of sad about it is we've even forgotten how to be together in public spaces. So yes, television did that to us. So yes, you and I, we grew up with TV. We were acclimated already. We were born into it. So we never had the before time. Us. Okay. Mm-hmm. So think of what the young people today are, my kids are Gen Zers. So they're all between the age of 18 and 22. And this is the age of my students. And so I started teaching 24 years ago. And so I got to see the whole thing, right? The whole shift when the students were actually hanging out with each other in the hallways and talking to each other and, kind of like, doing the things that students do. Now, nothing like that. They're all on their phones. None of them, students come to me now, Ross. They come to me and ask me if I will be the head of the chess club because they want to hang out with each other without phones. I'm not kidding. It's really sad. So it's sad. Yeah, they know what's happening. It's really difficult. It's almost as if we can't fight against it.
Is this where you begin to link to a broader concept of non-human intelligences? Is this the linkage point for your work?
So there's a few things. And a few things that were surprising to me. So this is why I like my work, because I do a lot of things. Like when I was looking at purgatory, I found that purgatory was a place in Ireland and you could still go there.
Really?
So it's on this lake. It's called Loch Derg. It's an island on this lake, the Red Lake in Ireland. And it's still a pilgrimage. Probably 1 million people a year go there. And people used to go there and they used to go into a cave. And if they were able to, survive the night in the cave, they were free of sin. So this is purgatory.
You have to cut off Darth Vader's head and you take the mask off and it's actually yourself the whole time?
Yeah.
You have to confront your Jungian shadow in there? How fun.
Yeah. They thought they were demons. So I guess they were bad people. In fact, you had to be really bad in order to go to this cave. So, all right. So my point is that I'm surprised when I find this stuff out. I'm like, wow, really? And I was surprised to find out when I looked through Marshall McLuhan and when I looked through the work of Teilhard de Chardin, that there were instances of other intelligences. Okay. So in Marshall McLuhan, though, he's not talking about UFOs. He's talking about a new form of the human. Now he also has a conversion. So he doesn't start being Christian, right? He's learning all of this stuff at Cambridge, and this is the Western tradition. And then what happens is he decides, I wonder if this stuff is real. He said, I bet I'll ask God, I'll test it out. So he asks God. So he prays. He says, is this stuff real? Send me a sign. And lo and behold, a bunch of signs come and they don't stop. They keep coming. He's overwhelmed and he converts to Catholicism. And he talks about this thing called his spiritual sense, which apparently he has. And so I was really amazed by this because this was something, he described it perfectly, exactly like Teilhard de Chardin's spiritual sense. And the spiritual sense is something that you see in religious tradition. So in my basic studies class on religion, kind of the intro to religion, I say, what do we know about religion? Like, tell me some common things that we know. And a lot of students will say, well, people pray, they meditate, they do this. Yes, they do. Why do they do that? Right? What are they doing? It seems kind of odd. They all do it? Yeah. What they're doing is they're engaging with this sense, this spiritual sense. We've lost that tradition today. We don't believe that we have that. But these guys, right, Teilhard and Marshall, they knew they had it because theirs was just like our sense of sight. So, or our sense of taste or touch. So theirs was that obvious to them as our senses are to us. And to me, I had to write about that because it was overwhelmingly important to their work. In fact, that's where their work comes from, was this very intense recognition that there's a spiritual sense. Marshall McLuhan said that the spiritual sense will be shifted through technology. And I do see that. So it's today, of course, we have people who study the brain. So when, there have been these studies, and that's what I decided to look into when I saw, wow, the spiritual sense is really important to these people. I wonder what people are saying about it now. So I started to look into cognitive science, but it's this author who wrote The Awakened Brain, and she does cognitive science. And so she's looking at how when people are involved in religious practices, certain parts of their brain are lit up. And so this would indicate regions of the brain. And perhaps this is where spiritual senses reside. I don't know. But that's what I'm looking at now, is like this spiritual sense. And what happens is that when young people are using social media, they don't, they're not engaging that sense. So in religious traditions, it's built into the tradition, like there's bar mitzvah, there's confirmation and Catholicism that, bring young people into this recognition that they are now responsible for cultivating an interior sense. But this is a lost tradition. I don't think there are some religions that still practice that and still teach the young people that. But for the most part, this is definitely lost, and it might be permanently lost if we allow social media to inhabit that sense now.
In one of your early chapters of the new book, you mentioned that actually social media and the world that it's created might actually be a good candidate for the Antichrist, contra Peter Thiel's Greta Thunberg safetyism kind of take on that. Is that an accurate representation of how you feel about this?
Well, that's a provocative description of it, but I had been to a conference where Peter Thiel gave his talk on the Antichrist, and it caused me, of course, to think hard about the Antichrist, right? So, and I thought, I don't think he has that right. So, because he never talked about the interior sense. And so, he did talk a lot about precedents, like literary precedents, Catholics writing about the Antichrist and so forth. One of the books is called I forgot his first name, but his last name is Benson. It's called, I think it's called The Antichrist, actually. Or no, The Lord of the World. It's called The Lord of the World. And so his point, and he's writing in the early 20th century, his point is this, is that during the end time, right, what happens is that people have completely lost their interior senses. They don't even know that they exist. And because they've lost their interior sense, their spiritual sense, evil is, people become just routinely evil. So, euthanasia is rampant. These things that are all that Christians don't like, right? Like euthanasia and things like that. And it's considered a good thing. Like, in fact, euthanasia is Greek for a good death. And so they think when a person reaches a certain age, they don't want to live, or they don't want to live. They should be allowed to die. And many people believe that today. I know that Christians just generally don't believe that. And so that's the point, is that he's making the case that there's good, right? And there's good in like boring life, like boring, ordinary things. There's goodness in those. And because we live in a world that doesn't recognize that, that it's just going to go away. And that what will be the end time, is that we just don't even know that we have a spiritual sense or a spiritual life, and that ordinary good things are ordinary good things. We won't even know that. And so that's what I wanted to point out. And I said, what's doing that to us now? And so social media is doing that to us now. It's literally like erasing that part of our brain. And I thought that would be the candidate. I'm not saying that the social media is the Antichrist, because in some countries it's regulated and it's not. It's actually helpful. But certainly the way it is here is, if we're going to identify one, that would be a candidate. That would be my top candidate.
One thing I wanted to ask you about while I had you here is how, for some reason, I've read a lot of science fiction, and I never noticed how much psychic phenomena shows up in it. And of course, Childhood's End, I hadn't read that one until I came across it in your work, but you discuss it at length in the others. But there is a strong sense that the evolution will not merely be technological, but it will in some case be networked brains, psychic phenomena. It's possible this is parable or symbolism about how we will network as envisioned from a pre-cybernetic stage of human development, like when Arthur C. Clarke is writing. Why is that so prominent in science fiction, and why does that basically go invisible for so much of it? And once you pointed it out, I started watching films like Solaris is one that I recently watched where I'm like, oh, I didn't know this was a sort of like supernatural. It's like an alien, like space movie, but it's psychic. It's spiritual. Something else is happening here. Why isn't that represented? Because science fiction almost presupposes a materialist paradigm, and it's not true. And I think people misunderstand the genre when they make it too materialistic. Why do you think we've misinterpreted the genre?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So, first off, Arthur C. Clarke definitely believed in telepathy and, mind reading and that kind of thing. He thought that there were a lot of like fakers right out there making money from it. So that kind of turned him off to studying it. But he definitely believed in it. And so did Marshall McLuhan. What's interesting is both of these men believed in it, but they didn't necessarily give it the status of something supernatural. Because they believed, so this is what Arthur C. Clarke, this is one of his laws, that it's technology we just haven't figured out yet, right? And well, my point in writing that, and also I included some examples, technology's already figured it out. Okay, so we do have, and I've written a lot of articles that are for free out there, by the way. They're kind of academic, boring stuff. You have to want to learn about that thing. But, they're journal articles. And one of them was talked about these professors about, I think this was in 2017 that were doing this. So you can imagine this has gotten much, much better. But they were basically creating software that could read our brain waves in various ways. And, okay. Fast forward to 2023, and I'm at South by Southwest and talking to some tech people, and they're talking about experiencing this. So having a computer software program read their brainwaves while they're thinking about their dog, and then seeing, their dog appear, just as they image it on the computer screen. And so this, I think, is what McLuhan and Arthur C. Clarke were pointing out, is that nothing's really supernatural. It's more naturalistic. It's this naturalistic kind of idea. And this is there. So I also link this to Stephen Dick's analysis of what he calls post-biological existence. Like, he's a NASA historian, and he's written a lot. He has a huge bibliography on potential extraterrestrial life. And he said, most likely the reason we are not aware of it is because it is so advanced that it's incommensurable. Like, we can't, our brains are not capable of understanding it. And he provides an analysis of how we can understand how it exists today. And it's technological. It gets beyond a certain technological, that past the AI stage. And it's self-replicating, and it becomes its own life form. And for us, it would be like a deity. It would be able to read our minds. It would be able to blink in and out of our reality. So he's seen it as a natural evolution.
So you're just rejecting the framing of natural versus supernatural. You think that is a misleading taxonomy?
I'm not necessarily rejecting that. So no, I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is I'm saying that certainly Arthur C. Clarke rejects it. And certainly, in a sense, Marshall McLuhan on some level, even though he's a professed Catholic, he's basically saying, certain things are definitely going to be more natural, like mind reading and so forth. We're not going to have any sense of privacy in the future, he said. And he was speaking in the 1960s, 70s, and so forth, and 80s, really. And so he's talking about our future, what we're living through now. He's saying privacy, kiss it goodbye, right? So, there's a lot of things that we take for granted in terms of like, what is a human being? And he says, those things they won't obtain in the future. So that's what I'm saying. I'm personally, my own religion is I am Catholic. I believe in God and the supernatural reality of God. But does that disclude looking at these kinds of things and seeing them from their perspective? No, I can do that. And in fact, if you look at the history of saints like Joseph of Cupertino and so forth, they mind read, right? They do mind read.
What do you think it's going to be like to be a human moving forward in the next couple of years? Are we going to radically change our ontology, or are we going to have to update what it even means?
Oh, definitely. I think we're going to update what it means. I think that religion is going to be very important for people. I think they're going to rethink what it means. I think they're going to maybe. I know that a lot of communities right now are already doing this. So if you look at certain communities, we should not look at them and look down upon them like the Amish. Okay, there's a lot of wisdom there. So many Amish communities, by the way, they're usually they're varied in their beliefs. They're not all the same. So in certain of those communities, they don't entirely reject technology. They reject what will prevent them from being fully engaged with God and their families and the things that their religion tells them are important, like family life, community life, and so forth. Therefore, if family life and community life is so important, they reject television. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of wisdom in certain communities. Certain indigenous communities have rejected writing as a form of technology because they knew that it would change their culture if they, so if they lost their oral tradition. So there's a lot of wisdom, I think, that we can gain from looking at the variety of ways that what you call non-secular religions have their relationship to technology and what we would call progress.
And a secular religion being something like transhumanism or Ray Kurzweil singularity type talk, that might be an example of a secular religion.
Okay, so sorry I didn't identify what I meant by that. So those would be new religious movements, which you've learned about.
Oh, okay.
Religions within the last 150 years, new religious movements. But I'm calling secular religion, even Christian religions that have acclimated to the rationalist Enlightenment frameworks. Like, okay. not necessarily believe people who are practicing Christians or practicing, whatever their religion is, but the tenets of their religion are that non-human intelligences like angels and demons and so forth exist, supernatural things exist, but they're like, well, they existed in the first century, but they don't exist now. So I would call that secular Christianity.
How interesting. I feel like belief in those things is probably stronger than it's been in a long time with the rise of occult practice and people being really interested in astrology and various new age and occult things. But I imagine there's a fair amount of overlap between summoning AI, summoning transdimensional beings. Some people do weird out in that kind of way.
That's right. They do. Absolutely.
Although weird out is sort of a pejorative way to put it. I don't even know how I want to keep it exactly as framed. Dinah, thanks for coming on. I'm going to have to make the link to climate change in this intro, but climate change is a big question about what it means to be human in a world that's changing. And your writing is interesting to me because it deals with that from what seems like a perpendicular angle, but it's not at all. I feel like all this stuff is all wrapped up in the same kinds of questions. And thanks for taking a flyer on a show like this.
Oh, yeah, this is great. I really had a great conversation.